with all the meta pieces in place, let's now think about where we're actually going to put this podcast. So let's first look at media hosting. This is where your audio files actually go. Now, podcasting is a largely decentralized medium. What that means is, unlike something like YouTube, where you upload a video to YouTube and it's consumed on YouTube, you upload a podcast episode to a media hosting provider. We just call them a media host. They then effectively disseminate that information to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other places. So what you're not doing is actually uploading your audio to Apple or Spotify or Amazon or Google. If you think about it, that would be a nightmare to have to do. What you actually do is you get a piece of information from your media host that you then give to all of these directories. They then can use that information to check to see if you have new episodes available. The way it all works is based on or powered by blogging technology. So back in the early 2000s, as blogs became more popular, people wanted a way to be able to receive new blog posts without having to check their favorite websites every morning. And so came this invention of something called RSS, which is stands for Really Simple Syndication. It's a file that's written in a language that can be read by humans and computers. It's meant to be read more easily by computers. And it simply lists all of the syndicated items on your website. For example, it is a list of all of your blog posts. That's what it was back in the day. It was the title and the URL of the blog post and the date that it was created, and maybe a special ID, an incrementing number maybe that was generated by the blogging software. People who used websites like back in the day, there was Google Reader and other things, they would plug in all of these RSS feeds into their software, and the software would go out and check to see if there were new blog posts available. Spool on a few years, and we now have that with podcasting, and RSS has really remained exactly the same, but it's not exactly exclusively used by podcasting, but it is more heavily used in podcasting than in anywhere else. The bottom line is, if you don't have an RSS feed, meaning if you can't subscribe to your podcast or follow it in Apple Podcasts or another podcasting app, then you don't have a podcast. What you have is some audio on the internet. It's that RSS feed, which is a file on the internet made up of this code, this language that humans and computers can read. That is what makes your podcast a podcast, what differentiates it from being just a bunch of audio on the internet. Now, every podcast has its own RSS feed, and just as we would have with blogging, every blog post has its own web page, and it's exactly the same with audio. Because podcasting borrows almost all of its infrastructure from blogging, the expectation is every episode has a specific web page. Now, in practice, not everybody uses that, and some of the bigger podcasts, they don't think people care about this stuff. But one of the reasons that it is useful for us starting out and at a smaller scale is it means that we get search engine optimization benefits, and it also means that people can tap the title of your episode and go through to a website or a web page that you control. So we'll talk about that. This land that you control, this is a website that you own. That's why it's one reason the domain name is so important. You want to make sure that when people land on the website for your podcast, that you can invite them to take certain actions. That might be subscribing to your email newsletter or following you on social media. If they're a completely new listener, you want to make sure that they've got easy access to follow the show in their podcast app, so you don't have to keep promoting each episode to them each time. They will get it automatically on their phone. It means that you can focus on your priorities. So when we come to sharing our episode on social media, we want to make sure that we share the link to our website and to the episode page that we've created or that has been created for us, because it's that way you're not restricting the visitor. So, for example, if I share an Apple Podcasts link, I'm sort of tacitly saying, if you're an Android user, jog on. Like, this podcast isn't for you. You figure it out yourself. I'm not interested. And if you consider that most people in the world have Android phones, or more people in the world have Android phones than iOS devices, far more. If you consider that, then why would you necessarily share an Apple Podcasts URL or exclusively share one? Okay, so you could share Spotify. That's absolutely fine, right? Spotify's universal, and you can hit play, and that's great. Or you could go for Amazon Music or something like that. The problem there again is similar. Is that it's not that it sends a message to the listener. It's then it doesn't really help you because it's not land you control. You can't easily invite people to take actions that benefit you, like signing up to your newsletter or even finding related episodes, related content, that kind of stuff. Now, each of your episode web pages should contain an embedded media player so that when people land on your episode page, they can play the episode. So this is for people who have not those who have tapped the title and gone through, because obviously they can already play it in their podcast app. Now we're talking about people for whom you've shared the link on social media. Maybe you've got an audiogram or some other piece of promotional content which we'll cover in the growth course. Maybe you've got something like that is pointing people to your website and to that episode page. If that's the case, we want to make sure that bang, right up the top, they've got the title and they can click play really easily on that embedded episode player. And your media host will provide that player for you. And it's relatively easy to embed that if you're making the page up yourself. Don't worry, we will go through all of these steps. So let's first look at separate media hosting. That is audio, MP3, podcast episode file hosting that is separate from your website. So you've no doubt heard about Anchor, Anchor.fm. It's owned by Spotify, purchased in 2019, I believe, and it is responsible for the largest number of podcasts in the world, largely because people use it to test out the medium. Now, Anchor is free. The problem with free hosting is not a universal one, but some things to consider is you probably already know the adage. If the product is free, then you are the product. As an audience, you are effectively what is being sold because it's your data that is then the economized sort of unit. Also, now that's not necessarily too big of an issue for something like Anchor because it's not like it's piled full of ads. But their priorities are not aligned with yours. Now, with something the size of Anchor, or if we look at podcast hosting that is free, even discounting Anchor, we can never quite be sure, partly due to priorities, partly due to changing economics and all sorts of other issues, how long those services will be available and available in their current state. If you think just about the freeness of Anchor, with it being tied to Spotify, we are assuming that Spotify is going to always remain interested in podcast hosting. That might not be the case. They like it. They love it right now because it's allowing them to disseminate content across their system and provide extra content that they don't have to pay for, unlike the music. So it behooves them, it suits them down to the ground to have podcasting in their purview. Some of the other issues around Anchor are related to that tie-in with Spotify, and these are things to be aware of. I'm not trying to be a scaremonger or a doommonger, but I just think it's worth you knowing that the increasing push that Anchor and Spotify are sort of working together is a push against the open ecosystem of podcasting. So I talked about that decentralization. That fact that you can host your podcast anywhere, pretty much, and then it can be disseminated anywhere. It can be played in various different apps, and all you have to do is tell the podcast app where to find your show. Anchor are increasingly making that difficult so that shows are only available within Spotify. Now, whether you love or dislike Spotify aside, that's not great for you. That's not great for your podcast. To get to a point where it's primarily or even wholly available in one place, that's not great, because again, you're completely at the whims of that platform. You know, if Spotify take umbrage with something we've done, if we're on other hosting mechanisms, we can say, hey, you'll find us over here. You know, you'll always find the show here. If Spotify does something that we don't like and we want to remove our show from Spotify, we know that we are going to be in other places. If you start going down the Anchor route with the state that it's in at the moment, their encouragement, their inducement is for you to remain in the closed Spotify ecosystem, and it just isn't the best thing for you or your podcast. All right, so there's enough of that. Why is it actually useful? Why am I mentioning it? Why do so many people use it? So many people use it because it's free, and it is easy to use. No doubt about that. There is also one of the reasons that people use it is because they think that they can make money from it. Now, this is again another problem that we have with the mechanism, is that it's important for Spotify to make some kind of money through their big acquisition of Anchor. And so one of the ways that they can do that is by taking a cut of advertising. And they are encouraging all podcasters to place ads in their Anchor-hosted podcasts using to amplify Anchor, to sponsor. So Anchor are basically sponsoring any podcast that has a certain number of downloads and saying, hey, you can make money. It looks great for Anchor, and it creates a sense of optimism. Unfortunately, what it does is actually create unrealistic expectations, because no one else is providing those sponsorships. It's only Anchor, and it results in an unpleasant listener experience as well, because what actually happens is every episode at the beginning begins with a 2-minute ad for Anchor. So that's one of the reasons people like it, is because they think they're going to make money from Anchor. And as we've discussed before, quite apart from the fact that most people won't make more than about $30 in their entire podcasting career using that mechanism, as we've discussed before, you have my permission to not make money through your podcast. Okay, that's enough about Anchor. Let's move on to paid media hosting. So here are some options that you have. If you want to use Anchor, that's absolutely fine. I'm not upset, and you're not doing anything wrong. As long as you're sort of aware of the caveats. If it still feels right to you, if you want to spend your budget elsewhere, then go ahead. Absolutely no problem. Libsyn is the biggest, or certainly most well known. It's actually not the biggest anymore, but it is the most well known. It's an established name, has been here for almost quite literally decades, multiple. They've been doing this a long time. They're trying to get better at user interface. They're still not great at it. It's still not a priority, but they are trying. They have got lots, and they have got all of the features that anyone could need. It's just a little bit like digging through a drawer full of cables to try and find that one USB adapter that you need. It's just a little bit tricky. It's all there, it's just not easy to find. Buzzsprout, on the other hand, now the biggest, or currently the largest paid podcast host. They've got hundreds of thousands of shows, and certainly 6 figures numbers of shows, and they provide a decent service, and probably one of the better pricing mechanisms that you'll find in terms of how they price. There's a lot of sort of church kind of podcasts on there. It tends to be that kind of stuff on there. Lots of sort of community projects on there, and it's very difficult to Google anything to do with starting a new podcast without coming across Buzzsprout. They, as we discussed earlier, they have Buzzcast, which is a great show. They're lovely people, and they do a really good job. So Buzzsprout is definitely an option for you. Their websites aren't great. We'll talk about website integration and stuff in a bit as well. Captivate, over the last few years, has really risen in the ranks very quickly. It is now owned by a large radio conglomerate here in the UK. It was an independent business for a few years, and they got acquired fairly recently as I record this, and they have a wide number of services, a wide number of utilities and functions and things that you can do within the Anchor dashboard, within the Captivate dashboard. There's a lot there that they can provide for you. Castos is another option. A quick disclosure is that this used to be my job. It's perhaps why I have so many opinions about paid podcast hosting, but I used to run a media host, and my host sold to Castos. Castos is an option that is in your it's an arrow in your quiver. Fireside is another one set up by podcasting stalwart Dan Benjamin. A very good and popular service. Can be a little bit clunky sometimes. It's designed by a developer, and it kind of feels like that. It kind of has that, it follows paradigms that make sense as a developer to build things in certain ways. As a programmer, doesn't necessarily always feel the most sort of friendly and usable, but it has a good number of features. Simplecast is now owned by a very large media conglomerate, and they will help you with, you'll get a nice little website, and they will also help you with dynamically inserting ads, as will Captivate as well. And Transistor is my personal favorite and the one that I use. It is not the cheapest of the bunch for certain things, but it's simple, it's uncomplicated, it's easy to use, and it has pretty much all of the features that I need right now. And so I manage a good number of podcasts for myself and for other people using Transistor. So now let's look at the website that goes along with your podcast. Now, I've recorded a video previously about why it's important that your podcast has a website, and it is. I've gone through some of that proselytizing here already, so I won't tread on that ground again. But your website for your podcast can be separate from the media hosting. So you can have a separate website host from the audio hosting. You can use a website builder like Squarespace or Wix or any of those kind of site builders in order to put your podcast together, your website together, as long as you can create arbitrary pages or blog posts within that website that you can then create your episode pages for. As long as you can do that, then pretty much any website builder will work. There is a podcast-specific website builder called Podpage. We talked about that RSS feed earlier. Podpage can use that RSS feed to build episode web pages and a whole website for you. They will even do other things if you pay a little bit extra, like taking Apple Podcasts and I think Podchaser reviews and allowing you to feature the best ones on your website. There's some lovely things that they will allow you to do as well. And it's a really flexible service. So definitely take a look at Podpage if the idea of building a new website from scratch is not something that brings you joy. Some media hosts, as I've mentioned briefly, will handle that website stuff for you. So here's a rundown of some of those services that actually provide decent website hosting so you don't have to pay for it separately. Captivate. They have a few templates that you can use. They look okay, and there's a nice bit of customization there. So you can take your brand colors, and you can customize the player, but also a few bits of the website in and around it as well. You can't create, at the moment, you can't create like arbitrary pages or blog posts and stuff like that. But if you just want to get set up with an okay website, they have a focus on search engine optimization. It's something that they care about, so they will help you with that aspect as well. So Captivate is definitely a strong contender. Fireside it's not necessarily as flexible in terms of themes, but it does allow you to create web pages and I think even blog posts if you pay a little bit extra as well. So if you want something that feels a little bit more fully fledged, then Fireside is definitely an option. I've run a couple of podcast websites exclusively on Fireside, and I've been able to do some nice things. I can embed content. I can create a web page with a contact form, and I can update people with blog posts if I want to let people know about the show without recording an episode, all that kind of stuff. I can do that with Fireside as well. Simplecast gives you a few little nice, simple websites that you can choose from. They're just nice and clean and sort of uncluttered. Transistor, it's getting better. Its website offering was not great, but they are adding more customizability. They're adding themes, and it is actually starting to get a lot more attractive as a proposition. So it is worth taking a look at Transistor if you don't want to host your website separately. My particular workflow is that I have a separately hosted website, and then I use Transistor just for the audio. So some things to consider then when we're thinking about websites and your media hosting. Think about your budget. Sit down and figure out, as a project that is supporting your work, how much can you afford to put into this? Is it $20 a month? Is it $100? Hopefully it's somewhere in between there. Maybe, I think $50 a month is a really good amount to be thinking about hosting, and subscriptions to services like Squadcast for recording your episodes and Descript for editing those episodes. I think $50 a month is a pretty good budget, and then within that you can sort of play around and see what works for you. Think about the level of control that you want. How much control, how much customizability? Are you going to want to make the logo bigger? Are you going to want to move things slightly to the left? Or do you just want to get yourself set up? I think until you get to sort of maybe even 50 episodes, actually just getting yourself set up is the best thing. As long as you've got a good website that looks okay, that's easy to use, that works on mobile, and that is on land you own, so it's a domain name that you've bought. As long as those things are in place, then for your first few months, that's absolutely fine. You can always then think about how you separate that out later. As I said, owning your own domain name is important, but also there is a concept of being able to own your feed. And what that means is, if you can, this is a minor consideration because I know you've got a lot to think about and I don't want to blow your mind off, but if you can think about something like your .com address, so myamazingpodcast.com, if you can make your RSS feed tied to that web address, so myamazingpodcast.com/feed, for example, and that's the RSS feed that powers your podcast, it then means that as long as, like, if you move to another host, another media host, you can take that name with you. If that hosting company goes down, your RSS feed is not tied to that company. So it's just a thing to think about and to ask if me bringing that up sparks something in you, yes, that is something I care about, then that's a conversation you can have with your hosting provider. If it's not, then don't lose sleep over it. Do think about search engine optimization. As I mentioned, Captivate is pretty hot on the SEO stuff. It will let you customize the title tag for your pages, which is a really good start. And there's some other stuff that they do as well around metadata and all that kind of stuff. So do think about that. Google is really strict on how it discovers, because it will go and discover RSS feeds for podcasts, and it does that by looking at your website. So you need to make sure that whoever you're hosting your website with, that information is present in the metadata of your website. And again, that's a conversation you can have with your media host and with your website host as well. And you can always book a session with me as well. Remember, you've got the one-to-one mentoring option in the menu of Podcode Plus. If there's something like this where your eyes are starting to glaze over and you just want to make it go away or get this problem fixed and you need a bit of advice, hit that button and grab 15 minutes with me. We can get it sorted out for you. And then think about directing new listeners. So, as I mentioned before, what we want to make sure of in your website is that there are buttons that easily direct listeners to follow the show in their app of choice. So, I want to make sure that as a new listener to my new show, I have a prominent place on my website. Maybe it's in the sidebar, maybe it's up top of the page on mobile that has all of the buttons to follow the show. So that when I'm checking out the show, when I've been told about the show, or I've found it through Google, or someone's linked me to it, I'm on your website and I can see, right, there's the button for Overcast, which is the podcast app I use. And I can click that button and I can be taken through to the podcast in Overcast. There are all sorts of ways that can be done. It's not too tricky, but it is important. Do you have time to cross-post? By which I mean, if you are separating out your web hosting from your media hosting. So if you have a different website, like a WordPress website or whatever, do you have the time to upload your audio to your media host, put your show notes in there, get the embedded player code, hop on over to your content management system for your website and paste that information in? I'm describing it in a linear fashion, possibly making it sound a little bit more arduous than it is. And it's like many things, it's a process that you just get used to doing. But is that an extra node in your, is that an extra step in your workflow that you really want to, that you have time for? Or would you rather be able to just hit upload, publish, and know that it's gone to your website as well? Something like Captivate will do that. If you use Transistor for your website, they will do that for you, rather than you having to do the website stuff separately. And then, as much as I'm talking about Captivate, they do have a lot of features, and too many features developed by a small team can lead to a bit of flakiness sometimes, where it's not necessarily that those services stop working, but they stop getting maintained because the teams get distracted in chasing a new shiny feature. Because new shiny features are important to the growth of those companies and to their survival. So of course they want to go and make sure that those things are implemented. But what can sometimes happen is that new features get developed as and then as a detriment, those other features that they worked on before, maybe it's something that you use, they're not getting quite so much love now, and you find out that the documentation isn't being maintained or whatever. So one of the reasons I like Transistor is they are infrequent but not rare in their implementation of new features. It's something that they're constantly doing, but they don't jump at lots of things. Their features are easy to find, and they are sort of they're not bloated with lots of different features. And that's one of the things that I like about Transistor is I kind of use everything that they have, because they're just, they have everything I need and not a lot else, and there is value in that. So here is the simplest stack that you can set up using Captivate for the media and the web hosting. It's not the cheapest. But when I say that, I don't mean it is expensive. I literally just mean it isn't the cheapest. And like I say, little bit bloated with features. You may end up with just a big menu on the left-hand side with stuff that you're never going to use. But you may do. For example, quick example, is they've got quite a few features around podcast networks. That's probably not a consideration for you right now, but maybe in a few years' time, you start to think about, can we band a few shows together under a network? And then boom, you've got those services, those features already there in Captivate. SarahAndHart.com is a nice little website to check out. This is for a show called I'm Back, which is produced by a lady called Serena Savini. And she hosts the website and all of the media on Captivate. And so you can see there a sort of fairly customized website in terms of the logo and the colors and all that kind of stuff. It's there to reflect her brand. Here's the cheapest stack then. Of course, Anchor for media hosting. Podpage for your podcast website, because Anchor basically doesn't provide websites. Every episode has its own web page. But it's not land you control, because it's anchor.fm/whatever. So we can't customize that. So Podpage is what we recommend for the website hosting. And a nice example of that is PetiteSounds.com, which is all about language. Petite Sounds is a podcast that's hosted on Anchor, and then Podpage automatically creates new pages for each episode as they appear on the feed. Here's my sort of stack of least resistance, if you like. So this is, if we had our druthers, this is how we'd put it all together. Transistor for the media hosting, because again, simple and lovely and clean. Ghost for the website. Now, Ghost is a bit like WordPress or Substack. It's been around longer than Substack, but it has a few different things. You can host your own Ghost website yourself if you've got the nous, or a nerd who can help you with that kind of stuff. But you can also just go to ghost.org and sign up for their hosting, and they will take care of the whole process for you. You've got themes, you've got some plugins, and there's a bit of functionality, but they keep it really super, super simple, unlike WordPress, which has become this big bloated behemoth. Ghost is super simple. It's mainly about blogging, and it's got web page support. You can create pages as well. And you can embed an episode player from something like Transistor. So you upload your episode to Transistor. You then cross-post that over to Ghost. So you embed the player, you copy the show notes, and you post that as a blog post on Ghost. And again, you could do the same thing on WordPress. It's exactly the same concept. And then you get the episode URL for your blog post, and you post that back in Transistor. What that means is, when I talked about being able to tap through to the episode title, so when someone's listening to your episode on their phone, they tap the episode title, they go through to that Ghost page or that WordPress page that's got your player, and it's got those show notes as well, because again, it's land that we own. Good example of this is Tom Webster. So tomwebster.media, the website is hosted on Ghost, and he does exactly this. He runs his newsletter, and his podcast is an extension of his newsletter. It's him reading out the newsletter, but just with a little bit of flair. And he hosts the audio with Transistor, and then he embeds the player and puts the full content of the newsletter in that post. And so what he's actually doing there, it's really nice, is, and we cover this in the blog to podcast course. He's effectively doing sort of double duty here. His newsletter is powered by his blog. It's the same thing. Like, each blog post is emailed out as a newsletter. And so it's already his blog post. He's then just adding in the embedded episode player from Transistor. So he's not doing like having to maintain a separate newsletter and a separate blog post, and it's all sort of encapsulated in the one thing, in the one place, which is quite nice. Now, you can host your own media. You may be aware of this. You can host your own audio files for your podcast. You can do that using WordPress. So again, if you've got a nerd who's helped you set up WordPress, or you've downloaded it and installed it from something like GoDaddy or whatever, then you can host your audio using WordPress. Seriously Simple Podcasting is a plugin that you can use. It is now bought out by Castos, has been for a few years. You don't have to use Castos hosting, but that is something they will encourage. However, you absolutely can host the audio yourself using the Seriously Simple Podcasting plugin to maintain that. I used it for a number of years before Castos bought it. It's complete coincidence, and in fact, that might be how I first heard of Castos. It's a great plugin. It really, really is. If I were to run another self-hosted WordPress podcast, this is the stack I would use if I wanted to host the audio myself. Now, that last bullet point there is important, because if you are hosting the audio yourself, you're paying the bandwidth bill yourself. For example, if I have an episode that goes viral or just gets a huge spike in traffic, and it does happen from time to time. Quick example is a show that I helped produce. Their first episode, they had a massive thought leader on as their first guest, and the numbers went through the roof as a result. Now, the hosting company they were with at the time had unlimited hosting, so that cost was aggregated, if you like. They paid whatever it was, $20 a month for the hosting, and that one episode had tens of thousands of downloads, and they didn't pay any extra. If they were hosting that on WordPress, they would be paying for every download of that episode. Now, also, when you consider that much of the time, full episodes are downloaded and they're only partially listened to, if at all. It's not uncommon for a whole MP3 file to be downloaded and maybe only a small portion of that is listened to. But yet, that is a bandwidth bill that you would have to foot. Obviously, your hosting company will provide you with a certain amount of bandwidth, but they're not set up to have that kind of... That's not what they're setting up for. That's not what their pricing is assuming that you're going to do. So you are likely, when your podcast becomes popular, you are likely to end up footing that extra bandwidth bill. And it's just not something you want to do. You've also got if you think about the IT infrastructure and all that kind of stuff, it's not, again, the juice is not worth the squeeze. Of course, you've got Squarespace as an option for hosting your website as well, and hosting the media. It is sort of simple and all in one. They will host the audio files as well. but the stats that you get aren't great. It's not really meant for it. It's tricky to get the RSS feed, and it's really fiddly, and it's just it. Although it can be done, I wouldn't recommend it because it's just a bit of a fiddle. And then there are limits on the number of episodes in the feed, which becomes as in you might have 300 episodes, in however many years' time, but your feed might only provide the latest 100, which might be okay, but when you come to move, it's much harder to migrate away because the way that migration is done, i.e. if you moved from Squarespace to, let's say, Transistor uses your RSS feed. So if only 100 episodes are available in your RSS feed, that's all you're going to get. So bear that in mind as well. It's one of the reasons I wouldn't necessarily recommend Squarespace. So lots there. I know there was a lot in there for you to think about, but have a start by thinking about the budget that you can allocate for subscriptions. So not just thinking about the hosting subscriptions, but also if you're going to be recording remotely, you might want to set aside maybe $15. If you're using Descript, you want to set aside a little bit of money there as well, and then think about what you can allocate to media and website hosting. Have a look at the websites for podcasts you like. Just think about podcasts that you enjoy. If you can, try and think about the ones outside of the sort of NPR or BBC ecosystems, the very large ones, purely because they sometimes are a rule unto themselves in terms of, because they work in such large numbers, they're not thinking too much about SEO and all that kind of stuff because it's just they don't have to think about it. So they're not always the best examples. But if you've got other shows that are in your sphere of interest that aren't necessarily put out by those larger media conglomerates, then take a look at their websites. Just Google and try and find them, or tap the link, tap the title of an episode in your player and see what happens. See where you go. Do you feel like that's a good fit? Can you scroll down to the bottom of the page and find out how the page was built, how the website was built? Take a look at the websites provided by the hosts that you're considering as well. So I've given you all of those options. Links are further down on the page for all of those. They are affiliate links, but as much as I've sort of recommended certain, or I've called out certain services, I'm purely just telling you these are my findings and thoughts and recommendations, not based on, I have no idea which of those sites has a better affiliate program. So I couldn't even do that if I wanted to. But and if you don't want to use the affiliate code, if you're sort of unsure about where my recommendations are going there, then take a look at the ratings and Google, do your own due diligence on that stuff if you're not completely sure. And then while you're sort of in that research phase, then have a look at YouTube for walkthroughs. Some of these might be provided by the hosting companies themselves, but you'll also find some podcasters will do their own walkthroughs of various services, showing you how they work. That's always a really good thing, I tend to find, because I personally like to see a video to get into the dashboard and figure out, like, how easy is this to use? How quickly can I get an episode out and know that all of the information is there? How much have I got to fiddle around with the show notes? Is it in the right format? Have I got to translate things? And am I clicking lots of different buttons all over the place? If I can have a look at a video for that hosting company and see how their insides work, then that gives me a bit more confidence in the tool that I'm using. And then, speaking of tools, we have a host comparison tool, which is linked in the description of this lesson. Take a look at that. It will ask you, it's only a sort of basic kind of rule of thumb. It's not necessarily super scientific, but it will give you some things to think about based on your priorities. So whether those priorities are budget or ease of use or the time that you have available, or whether they can auto-post to YouTube, which is a separate consideration, the host comparison tool will help you in that decision making. It will sort of try and prioritize the services. All of the ones that are listed there are ones that I either have direct knowledge with or have used in some regard. And there are reviews for a good number of them as well, where I've actually been in there and used it in anger, as they say. So take a look at those as well. So a lot of things to do there, a lot of things to think about. When you're ready, take a breather. And then we'll meet back here and we will talk about getting a trailer for your podcast together.